Hello and welcome to our event for the Castle of Horror Anthology Volume 9 Young Adult. We are gathered here with many, if not most. In fact, I think we're only missing a couple of the authors of the anthology, and I'm so honored that they would spend time with us this evening, especially as we're getting busy in the holiday season, to talk about the stories that we've gathered together for this anthology. My name is Jason Henderson. I am the co-publisher at Castle Bridge Media with my good friend Incher Yo, who is also on the line. Incher did the introduction for the Castle of Horror Young Adult Edition, and he also designed the cover, which you can see behind me in the background there. So what I'm going to do is go around and introduce Incher first, and then the authors to talk about their stories, and then we'll just talk about general process, and it's been a while since we've gotten together, so whatever else we can come up with. And if you guys have questions for your fellows, I want you to just go ahead and toss it out. So first of all, Incher, welcome. Thank you once again for a really cool cover and for taking on the duties of editing and introing. So tell me a little bit about, I want to say that the young adult anthology was maybe your idea. I think that I was like driving around, and I remember you saying, because this is how we do our meetings, is we just drive around and talk to the phone in the car. You said, what about young adult? So why?
Well, it's a genre that I really enjoy reading. And I felt like, young adult horror is kind of this category that doesn't get enough play. It's you're either one or the other. And I feel like to shine a spotlight on that is wonderful for us. Being a young adult sucks sometimes. And it's perfect, like I said in my intro. So it's ripe for lots of different stories, lots of different perspectives. And I thought it'd make a great anthology.
That's really great. I was just thinking about the fact that it's such a broad concept that, when you think about it, even something like, even Star Wars fits into the tropes of young adult, with Luke being something like 16 or 17, I think he's supposed to be. But Romeo and Juliet is also a young adult story with a lot of murder in it. Okay, let's just start going around the horn. Our first story laid out in the collection, and the stories get ordered a lot based on tone and whether something's funny or not funny, and contemporary or not contemporary, and you try to avoid the same sounding story being side by side, and it's always interesting how they finally work out. So the first story in the collection is something called Namaste by Jennifer Brody, and the way that I think she originally described it, and the way I described it in the run-up, was the most dangerous game with sorority sisters. So Jennifer, can you explain how exactly this story came to be?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. And wow, I get to go first. That's so exciting. So Namaste, the original title was actually Namaste Bitches, which is also both the opening and closing lines of the story. And I wrote this when I was in a residency at the Banff Center, if anyone's familiar. It's in northern Calgary in the mountains. And I was there in February in the snow. And I was supposed to be revising this sci-fi novel, which I'm still supposed to be revising for my agent, like many years later. And instead of doing that, I find myself writing this murder women mountain story. And I had the idea when I was at a yoga class, and they were doing, corpse pose and like chanting and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. What if you got hypnotized? What if it's actually powerful men hunting women in the mountains? Like a nice turn on Most Dangerous Game. So I wrote this a couple years ago, and just always knew it could find a place. And I think it's a story thematically that's only become more relevant. I often pitch it as Most Dangerous Game meets Handmaid's Tale. And it is about a group of freshmen in college. And our main character is not native to New York, didn't grow up with much, but she's trying to fit in. And she was dating this very wealthy trust fund kind of guy and she caught him cheating with her friend. And she's in that weird, terrible place where you know you got to break up with the guy, but you also secretly wish you could stay with him and that he'd come begging for you back, and you miss him, but you've blocked your friend, but not him, and you're hoping he'll text. So her girlfriends take her off to this off the grid yoga retreat in the mountains to try to get her mind off him. It's like a no phone kind of situation. Everything's forbidden. And of course, when she gets there, a lot of things start to go awry. There's some tone of Get Out was a big influence, I believe, on this Jordan Peele's thing. There's some dark comedy undertones to it. And I don't know, I just love this story. So I really appreciate you guys including it in the
What really struck me about it was this concept of class, right? And of class being something where you can come to find that people are disposable, and certainly gender, even though I can only look at that from afar, people's complaints about, I'm not being seen as a whole person. And so in a horror, you can kind of turn that into an allegorical story, where somebody can become literally a target, and that was really cool. That was really cool. Thank you very much. I want to get back to some of those topics when we go around. Alethea Kontis, gosh, I don't know how many collections you've actually.
Oh, why
been
I'm
with
so
so
glad you asked, because my books came in while I was gone. Look how many. They're so pretty.
Are those all of the Castle
are
of Horror that you've
All
written?
the ones I've been in. Yep, except for the young adult one I don't have yet.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that is really neat. That is really, really neat.
They look so good on the shelf.
No, I know. Well, and enter. I know that yours, because again, he designs all of those covers, all of them.
I
And
know,
there's-
I have a hard time picking a favorite. Like this one is amazing. Where's the women running from houses? That one is also so amazing.
Yes. Well, and the women running from houses one is it's one of my favorite covers, but it's also from before Intra did the big revamp on how the anthology is laid out. We changed the font format and the binding. I don't even know what you call it on the end. Intra, what do you call the end of a book? The spine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is what it is to talk extemporaneously. I'm sorry. Okay, so Alethea, welcome back. Your story is called Blood from Stone, and it is as different from Jennifer Brody's Namaste as you could possibly get. It still centers a female character, but it's magic. It's French. Tell me about Blood from Stone.
I love Blood from Stone because it is so quintessentially me. Leanna will be able to agree with this because it is dark and it's fairy tales, and it is essentially about a girl who is so crazy in love she will do absolutely anything. But the person she is so crazy in love with is Gilles de Rais, or Bluebeard, or Fitcher, Lord Fitcher. If you have read your fairy tales, he's the mass murderer of the fairy tale world, with the bloody chamber and the many ex-wives who he, carves up into pieces. The fairy tales are about the last wives that he gets, and the woman who saves herself by finding her sisters cut up in the bloody chamber, putting them back together, and finding a way to defeat Lord Fitcher. But my question is always, what happened to the first bride? Like, who was the first bride? And why is there a bloody chamber? And why in this fairy tale is there, okay, he like puts the women in this room and he says, don't go in this room. Here's a key, but don't go in this room, and don't bring this egg. Which is like, what? Because eggs are porous and the blood gets on the egg and you can't get it off. And he knows they've been in the bloody chamber because they brought the egg into the bloody chamber. So me and my scientific brain is like, I want to make all this make sense. So in soap making, in the old days, you would have to balance an egg in the lye. And if the egg floated on the top, that's when you knew your soap was done. Otherwise, it sunk to the bottom. And blood, if it gets on a porous substance like the egg, is really hard to get off, like marble, like the marble floors in a castle. So I was like, who would be the perfect person to fall in love with this guy and want to be his wife? Well, it would be like the Cinder Girl, who makes the soap out of the ashes from the fireplace. And she loves him so much that she actually helps him kill a bunch of children trying to summon a god.
Wow. I mean, I first of all, I have a question. Forgive my ignorance, but is Bluebeard directly related to that story? Is it the same story? Is it literally just a derivation of?
So Bluebeard and Fitcher's Bird were based on the real life story of Gilles de Rais, who went to war with Joan of Arc in France. You can do a bunch of research about him, and he was known for the mass murder of many young boys. They don't even know how many, maybe over 100. They know it was a lot. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I think what I loved the most was this notion of obsessive love, of love for somebody who who doesn't deserve it, you know, and yet, you know, she's so you know, so explicit about how much she loves this person that doesn't deserve her love. And that was just really, it was very cool. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. All right. So yet another switch, and this one back to more contemporary times. Bryan's not here, but he sent us a note. He said, so the next story was The Black House by Bryan Young. All right, so what I liked about this is it's a small town story. And he said, one of the itches I had was something in a really solid voice that wanted something and yearned for it. And he wanted to create kind of a To Kill a Mockingbird sort of small town thing. I am a sucker for small town stories. So, and it was really neat to go from like the cobblestones and castle walls of Alethea's story to the picket fences and so forth of mid-century small town, and, you know, love with a werewolf girl. So that was just really, really neat. And I'm sorry that Bryan couldn't be with us, but he had surgery, and so he's getting over that, but he sent us a nice note, and so our heart goes out to him. Monsieur David Bowles, I think you were with us in the very, very beginning, and you've come back several times. And you're one of my dear friends, and we've spent so much time together as writers, just commiserating. So
yeah,
I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see you back. The story you wrote is called Shattered Intaglio, and it is fantasy and magic, and I was completely just astounded by this world that you built, because it's a way bigger world than a story would need. And so talk to me a little bit about Shattered Intaglio.
Yeah, so I wrote the story as kind of like after having like built a universe. I wanted to create like a secondary world universe in which to play, and I had ideas for like this kind of like massive, you know, fantasy series that would happen in it. It was also like, it was my first attempt at like dabbling in YA. Back before, you know, like now I've got like 30 books for children and teens, and so, you know, this was from a different time, and the story had been like just been sitting around, and, you know, as kind of an experiment, but an experiment that I really, really loved, but that didn't feel YA. It felt a little, it feels like somebody who writes for adults who's trying to write for YA, and I think it works in a way that the marketplace might not like. Which is why it's just been sitting around and waiting for me to dust it off. And with some tweaks, I sent it off to you. But the idea is it takes place in a world that is basically a combination of like Republican Rome and India during like, you know, like again like early Buddhist times, like the Ashokan and Gupta empires. And I wanted to blend those two cultures that I was really fascinated with together. I created a whole, you know, conlang that was kind of like a blend of Sanskrit and Latin. I did like all this, like, you know, created like the religion. I spent, you know, a lot of fruitless time, as sometimes we do, on this, and then just wrote a relatively small story about the son of a senator who is essentially assassinated because he doesn't want this republic, the Republic of Baratu, to go to war to go invade the Republic of Lencas, which is like an island that is kind of like a blend of like Greece and Turkey and different Arabic nations. And his son, in this world where magic exists, decides to take revenge on the very, very prominent man who has caused his father's death, but he doesn't have the power that's needed. So he enlists the help of a type of like sentient talking ape that are enslaved by this kingdom. They're like golden furred apes that are essentially like taken from Indian mythology, and they have these collars around their necks with strange intaglios that keep them from using their magic. And he enlists the help of this creature and removes its chains essentially, and a bunch of tragic things result. So it's a fun story. Again, it's not your normal YA story. Now I like write YA fantasy and science fiction all the time now, and I would have told the story in a very different way, now, like, decades later after having created this universe. But I still really, really love it as a great, like you said, the world is really rich. The story is like dark and complex. Revenge stories are always fun. Teenagers having way too much power than they than they really ought to have, and things going awry. All that's a lot of fun. And I mean, it ends in a tragic way that it probably wouldn't. If I were writing it now, I would try to find a way to have the teenager be, victorious or whatever.
Well, you don't want to give it away, but yeah, if you were blasting it out into a 90,000 word novel, probably it would have a slightly different.
Yeah, there would be a little bit. It would go a little bit further and be more things. But I mean, I like what it says. I like the lesson that it teaches about the price of revenge and the price of power. And so, I kept it around for a long time, hoping that I could use it someplace. And I'm glad that it resonated with you. And I think that readers will like it as well. It is an oddball story though. So just heads up.
There's two topics in there that I hope we have time to come around to afterwards. And one is about what is it to write for YA? Like, what does that mean as an assignment? Yeah. And the other is this interesting thing about us as authors, just keeping stories around, like essentially forever, that you just waiting for that, because probably good chance you're writing all the time, and some of the stuff that you write doesn't even sound like you anymore. If Debbie, tell me how to say your last name, by the way.
It's Daughetee.
Daughetee, okay, which is what I was going to say. Now nobody will believe that, but that's the truth. Debbie Daughetee, in fact, you have a hell of a resume, and it's in television because you've written for like Murder, She Wrote, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and all this stuff. And what made me think of it is, as David was just talking about how his voice has changed, I know that there are changes in how you might do the script for a 40-minute episode versus a short story. And for yours, I try really hard to go from one feel to another. So you leave David's, sort of antique and horrific feel to yours, which is a very haunted and contemporary story about a girl who does gravestone robbings and, family pain and stuff like that. So first of all, do you play in the world of horror very much? And tell us a little bit about how the story came around.
Yes, I, as a matter of fact, when I got into television and I was writing on stuff like that.
Add to the list.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I'm sorry, hang on, let me.
Okay. I was writing for Dr. Quinn and Touched by an Angel and Murder, She Wrote. I got to do a vampire episode, so that was right up my line. My horror friends were saying, "What are you doing?" Because I've been in horror for a long time, and getting into television, you go where the breaks take you. So that's what I was doing. But the story actually it starts when I first got into television. I was a writer's assistant on a show called Tour of Duty, and I used to answer the fan mail. And there was a lot of stories about vets with PTSD. And one of them wrote about how he couldn't talk to his family about it. He would sit in the garage holding the grenade pen. And that Tour of Duty helped him to start talking to his family and help him. Ever since I started reading those fan letters, I've been very interested in PTSD. And then in 2017, I had a double lung transplant. And after that, I had PTSD myself. I couldn't read or write for a number of years because I didn't have the focus. So this is one of the first stories that I wrote after my lung transplant. So it was so exciting to have it sell. And I wanted to write a story about the background is that it was a veteran suffering from PTSD who committed suicide, and his daughter found him. And it was, with a gun. And so it was very graphic, and the family pain that causes, and how she retreats to the cemetery and starts making grave rubbings and finds a little bit of magic. And I had this story for about a month and it wasn't working. And then my husband told me about this thing he read about depression, and they described it as a black door. And that just gave me everything I needed to make this story into what it was. So that's the background.
I'm so happy that you're with us, and
thank you.
and I'm happy with this is in general, but also tonight, and that's a wonderful background. So thank you very much for.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
No, excellent, wonderful. This is giving me I want to come back to some of those themes. Okay, Julian, who I think you actually go by Joey, isn't that right? And
you could pick either one. People call me both. I'm flattered by both. Julian's just a pen name, but whichever you prefer.
Whatever you like. And I'm writing down here pen names because I'm just curious why some people use them and some don't, because James is also here and he writes under a pen name. Julian, your story, we go from a sort of Twilight Zone magazine sad story from Debbie to a blood spattered EC comic gory story from you. And it's just so funny to me that you said, oh, young adult, I'm going to write something about murder and baseball cards. So talk to me a little bit about 1-1.
So 1-1, it is an homage to a baseball card term and sporting card term. Some of you might be familiar with it. It is basically, if you see 1-1 printed on a baseball card, it is one of a kind. It basically means 1 out of 1 ever printed. I
had never heard of that before. I had literally like the idea that you would have literally, is that a real thing? Like Topps will make a single card that in 300 million people, one person gets this card?
Yes and no. So Topps will release a whole series of, like, let's just say baseball in 1 year. There's 500 base cards, but each one of those cards has a certain amount of serial numbered cards. So you could have like 100 out of 500, 107 out of 250. 1-1 is what everyone wants to get. Those are printing plates. A lot of them are autographs, jersey stitches. And they started doing it, I think, in the early 2000s, but it might have been earlier. So it wasn't always a thing, but they just recently started doing it.
Very cool. Okay, so anyway, the story, which is an homage to this, is about. So how did you come to this murder story?
It kind of came about from 2 different points of origin. The first was, I'm a 90s kid. some of you might be 90s kids. We grew up with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, sports cards, and at least in suburbia, it just so happened that your street cred often depended on what level of badass card you had. And I just remember constantly, throwing around the term, oh, I'd kill for that kind of card. I would kill to have that card. And that was like, ooh, that might be a cool way to play this. That's the first area my mind was at when I thought of this. The second is I work for a film company, and all the guys there are obsessed with sports cards. So I was able to pick up a lot of jargon, industry standards. We've went on lunch break to a hobby store that sold cards, and that's kind of where I filled in the blanks for this. It's a pretty short story. It's only about 2,000 words. So I don't know what to say that won't.
No. That's perfect, because it's a changing of the taste, and like I say, it would be perfectly at home in Tales from the Crypt. I mean, it really it fits right there with Hal Holbrook, murdering his wife over a box, and whatever. So, okay. Thank you very much. Ammar, Habib, we actually have not worked together before. But the story, The Curse of Amritsar, is an Indian location and an Indian locale, and it was all very new to me. So I wondered if you could explain the story, if you're there. I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you again for having me on this project. I had a lot of fun. So this was actually my first ever horror piece to write. So I had a lot of fun experimenting and finding my voice in this genre. Because in the past, I've written more young adult, some science fiction, some action thrillers, things like that. And so when I found out about this anthology, it was like 2 weeks till deadline to submit. So I had to come up with something pretty quickly. So I based this on kind of my own family's background geographically, just because it's easy to write about. Because my parents are both from South Asia, and two of my grandmas lived in Amritsar before the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan. So I had a lot of connection to this, and actually I'm working on a historical novel set there as well. So I already had a lot of research done. And so I kind of combined that background into a horror haunted house story. And I love tying my stories into like real life events. So the story is set in contemporary times, but I tied it into the 1947, partition riots to kind of give it that grounded feel as well. So I had a lot of fun putting it together.
I love this idea of young boys. It's exactly the same kind of story, again, that you would find in any sort of American setting. Boys joshing one another to go stay in a haunted house, but it's tied to this very specific history that was very special, because it might even, inspire you to go look this up and find, given that the city's real. So I really did appreciate that. That was very cool. And it reminded me of a Twilight Zone story. All right. Jess Hagemann, and am I to call you Jess? Is that what you want to go, or?
Yeah, Jess is great. Thanks.
All right, very, very good. So the story was The House of Many Rooms. The funny thing was, going from Ammar's story, which was very specific and very very tactile. Some people are going into a haunted house. In yours, this was something like the House of Stairs by William Slater. It was an extremely weird and allegorical story in which people are disappearing. Can you tell us a little bit about The House of Many Rooms?
Sure. So I live in Austin, Texas, and this story, The House of Many Rooms, was loosely inspired by a real life missing persons case in Texas. And it's something that it's still unsolved to this day. And I have just been fascinated by the story ever since, and thinking about it all the time and wondering what could have happened to this young kid who was on his way home from school for winter break and just disappeared along the side of the road. And so that's where the story started for me, was I wanted to explore one possible ending for this person's story. Of course, it gets very fantastical and is not meant to be a realistic solution or explanation for what happened. But as I thought about it, I was thinking, well, what is one of the more horrifying explanations for this story? And then how can you make that even more horrifying? Well, it doesn't just happen to him, it only starts with him, right? And then everybody slowly starts disappearing. And the people who disappear become known as walkers. And what does it mean to walk? We follow the kind of narrator story as she first watches the initial young man disappear and then walks herself straight into kind of a parallel universe. And the title comes from some research I was doing for a novel concurrently, Bible research for a novel about a cult. And so the House of Many Rooms comes from the Gospel of John. And so this kind of notion of something that is meant to be like a very benevolent, pure, beautiful religious image, subverting that as well until it becomes cosmic horror in my story. So
it's so weird, man. I mean, it's really creepy and poetic and weird. I really like that story a lot.
Thank you.
Just very strange. By the way, Texas, so many of us have a Texas connection. David's from Texas. Incher and I grew up in Central Texas. Like, and in fact, I know a lot of you guys are. Anybody else from Texas that I'm missing? Yes. Oh, three at
My
least.
husband's from Texas.
Yes. Well, it's a big state. Okay. But yeah. All right. Stephanie, Carmen, and Ammar. And in fact, Stephanie, when we get to yours, I think yours actually takes place in Galveston, if I recall. So very cool. All right. In fact, speaking of Texas, Carmen, your story, A Tale as Old as Time. The funny thing is that title makes reference to mermaids, but the story is, it references that because it's something that this young lady is really interested in, but it's really about this girl coming into her own as a person who has an understanding of magic. And I really loved the world that she's in, and the grandma that doesn't trust any
He
any
doesn't
of the
trust
news.
TikTok.
Yeah, she doesn't trust TikTok. She thinks it's a conspiracy, which it probably is. So tell us a little bit about Tale as Old as Time.
Well, that was really fun for me to write. And also, yo soy pura tejana también. Hi, David. We were in an anthology together. Anyhow, so my story, I took some ideas from my ancestors. My mother had a great grandmother named Mama Cuquita, and she was a curandera. And so I have the grandmother who's named Mama Cuqui, and she is a curandera in the story. And so her granddaughter Perla is in middle school, and she's in this play or this musical singing. It's Beauty and the Beast, and that's one of the songs from Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
And she's kind of an outsider because it's mainly it's not a lot of Hispanics at the school, and she befriends a girl who's Ukrainian, and they're friends because they both kind of don't blend in so well with the school. And she starts to tap into some powers that she has and uses these powers to help her with this bully, right? And and her friend,
and you want her to. I mean, you absolutely want this douchebag to get what's coming to him,
because he's a jerk.
Yes.
And, her friend Anya is also, she doesn't speak a lot of English, but she has some history with the Moltvarki, which are also like the dark and light magical. They're connected, right, with dark and light magic, and that is in their ancestry as well. So they kind of have more in common than they realize, and everything kind of comes to an end. Like it culminates with her tapping into this part of herself to kind of defend herself against this bully, but it also has a Carrie-like-esque feel at the end.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, otherwise it wouldn't be horror. So that's really wonderful. And I love it when people can present the place they grew up, such that those of us who didn't grow up there can kind of go, oh, I get what it's like to be in that neighborhood, and to be on that hot concrete, and to be in these apartment buildings and what have you. So that was just really neat, and it was a good presentation of that world. So James, I'm sorry. I should call you James. I had books of yours. I dropped them at your house yesterday. So you and I live like 10 miles from one another or something. So welcome. Anyway, so your story once again is a shift, and you can see the themes where I tried to order them so it's a grounded world and then a more fantastical world, and a grounded world and more fantastical. I called yours Lovecraftian. It's called The Light at the End of the Tunnel. It features some really creepy creature making that I really enjoyed. Can you talk about Light at the End of the Tunnel?
Well, it definitely was supposed to be Lovecraftian. It was, I'll be honest, it was a trunk story, but I had to modify it for this anthology, right? Sometimes,
a trunk story being a story that you just keep around for years, right?
Yes,
like David with his, yes.
Yes. So
absolutely.
Writers have this interesting thing that happens when they get together at bars. They come up with these really weird ideas that they all decide to write stories about and then can't publish, especially if they're going to do an anthology on them and the person who's going to do the anthology doesn't, right? Way back when, and this will give you an idea how long it's been a trunk story. Anybody remember what sparkling vampires are?
Oh yeah, of course. It's only been about 20 years since Twilight came out, so
But a lot of people really made fun of it, right? Because vampires aren't supposed to sparkle; they're supposed to be scary. And one of the ideas that was bounced around was sparkling Lovecraftian horror, right? I think it was actually sparkling Cthulhu. Is what I think it was.
I love that.
So I had written this story with that in mind, sparkly Cthulhu, right? So that made this story easily fall into the YA category, because it was already supposed to be like, wow, is Cthulhu really supposed to be friendly? Although Cthulhu's not in the story, though. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up with that. But I did go with the elder gods, and it was very easy to tweak the end a little bit to bring it back around to being actual horror instead of just making fun of the horror part. But yes, I definitely tried to go for the Lovecraftian horror feel, and I really loved the contrast there. One of my characters in there is I don't know, I don't want to call it called Gralf. And I don't want to say Gralf is fuzzy, because it's not really fur and hair, right? Because Gralf is kind of like a little mini cute eldritch horror.
Yes.
But I had so much fun trying to walk the line between having something that's supposed to be an eldritch horror and then having it actually be cute and cuddly and snuggly and licking the girl's face happy, so so that's where that came from, and that's why I enjoyed doing it so much.
I laugh and grimace at the same time, because yes, it is a cute little eldritch horror, and you're afraid that it's going to bite her face off, but it doesn't at that moment. So yeah, that was really neat. It's a neat piece. So if we lose Julian, who has to run off to emergencies, thank you so much. And thanks for explaining the 1-1.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Everyone.
And I'll send you links. All right, Mike, this is, I think, your second time joining us, and I enjoy seeing your tweets, because I live on Twitter. Twitter is sinking like the Titanic, but I'm going to keep floating on it and playing Amazing Grace until there's no Twitter anymore. I just live there.
Me too. I can't get enough of it.
So your story, this is the second you have your own style that's very it's very specifically Mike, and I really enjoy it. And this is the second one that's sort of about a youngish man, and this one's called "I Am Laid to Rest in Maine." And it's one of very few stories I've written from the perspective of somebody who has recently died. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so at the time that the first anthology that I was in, Love Gone Wrong, came out, I was taking a Gabriel Garcia Marquez class. And it was just me and the professor and one other student. So it was nice one-on-one. And we read The Most Handsomest Drowned Man in the World, which is a short story that is written from the perspective of well, it's written about a dead person. And then I'd also watched a lot of Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix, and I'd seen The Drowned Giant. So I went to actually find the J.G. Ballard story and read that. So I had a lot of dead people stories kind of floating around. And I wrote it in May, and then I played with it a couple of times, and then I realized, like, well, you know, I wrote it about a kid, and you know, it's kind of horrific. This could be a good chance to try to put this out there. So yeah, I mean, it really all came together in a few days for like editing this story to what it is today. I mean, once I like realized what I wanted to do with it, I had like a last minute sort of like come to Jesus moment, and I completely rewrote the whole thing. I saved like the first paragraph, that's it. But it was a lot of fun. I'm in a poetry class right now, so the poetic language kind of definitely came in very naturally. I was trying to think about like, how would I use poetic metaphors or kind of like poetic language and sort of that in this story too. So it was a lot of fun to write.
I think it's really great to have some of you with a very poetic voice and some with a much more naturalistic voice. I definitely do not write with a poetic voice, so it's really fun to encounter it and sort of take it in. David has a more poetic voice, for instance, than I do, and it's neat. It's just really neat to be exposed to these. So Scott Pearson. And by the way, I want to make a note, if we can talk afterwards about how y'all actually put together your stories and how long it takes to write them. But Scott Pearson, The Creature in J. Cook Park, you have a sort of Scott Pearson grand unified theory of stories, because you know a lot of yours go together, and this is a story that takes place in a world where monsters have started showing up, and you've just told a bunch of small, little, sad dramas in this world with monsters appearing. This one is The Creature in J. Cook Park, and it's like Stand By Me with monsters. So talk about that.
Yeah, I put out a couple years ago a book with a short novel by myself and a buddy of mine, Bill Leisner, that started this this shared universe between the two of us, where these monsters, shape-shifting monsters, are slowly appearing and more frequently appearing in the world. No one knows where they come from. No one knows what they're up to. And the plan is that as we progress forward through the decades, you know, more and more stuff will happen, more and more stuff will be figured out. And we're trying to work on longer stories, but in the meantime, I've started working on these short stories when they just happen to fit into the themes that your anthologies bring up. Right. The story that I did for you in this world, this is actually now my 4th volume of Castle of Horror that I'm in.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But in number 7, I did The Loneliness of Monsters, and that was one where the story idea had been bubbling in my head for several months at least, and then when the theme came out, it was just like was a lightning strike. It's like, wow, this story fits that theme perfectly. But in this case, this was a brand new story that when the theme came around, I just kind of started thinking, well, maybe there's something else I could do in my existing world. And then, I don't know, it was just one of those inspiration things where just that sentence, "stand by me," but with a monster instead of a dead body, just came into my head. And I love mashing things up. So I love, this world is kind of a science fiction world, but these stories have a horror angle to them. And they're period pieces because the novellas that we wrote were set in the late 40s. And now in these short stories, I'm setting them in the mid 50s. So there's a little bit more is going on with the monsters. It's getting reported on in the media now because there's so many things happening. The authorities can't keep them all covered up. And the previous story had been had a lot more creepiness and darkness to it. And so that's what inspired me this time, that I wanted it to be lighter and more fun, even though there's still, scary and horrific elements to it. And so you have the fun of, if you put a group of young boys together, you're going to have, the teasing and stuff that goes on that keeps a little bit lighter, even though it's happening within this darker moment. Because I really liked the idea that in the theme, you said that you wanted, that these teenage characters should have teenage problems.
Yeah.
And so that inspired me to have this angle to it where it's these three best friends, but two of them have had a falling out over a girl, which just seems, the classic high school boy thing. And then they go on this adventure. And I had a lot of fun writing it. It was a great challenge because I was really swamped with work at the time. And this was a fast turnaround kind of thing from when the call went out for them. And
sometimes that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had the first page of the story, I wrote over and over and over and over and over. I could not find my way into the story. I couldn't find where to start the story. Couldn't find, is it going to be in first person, in third person? I was just all over the place, almost wondering if I was going to make it. And then I finally found the way into the story. But then, I was up until 2 a.m. finishing it and sending it into you as soon as it was like hot off the presses. It's like, finish the final word, send it in.
It reminds me of John Malkovich's comment that it's not an overnight process unless you actually stay up all night doing it.
Yeah. And then, a big thank you to you for indulging my complete confusion about what to actually title it, which went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
Oh, I love that. I seem to have, I would say that if there were a diagram of conversations I have with authors, I think full 40% of it is titles. Is just like what are we calling this?
First I called it the J. Cook Park Monster, and then I realized that my previous story was called The Loneliness of Monsters. And it's like, well, I don't want two titles with monster in the title and also the last word. It needed to be something else. And then I just obsessively spiraled out of control trying to come up with a different title.
And you could decide something else different tomorrow. I mean, I actually think you could use the same word, but you're kind of stuck then from then on. Everything's going to have to include the word so that it creates a flow. We'll come back to that on titles, hopefully. All right. Thank you very much. Stephanie, Penumbra. Penumbra features a hurricane in the place of my favorite hurricane, Galveston. There's a hurricane museum. There was one of the most devastating hurricanes in the history of the United States took place there, but that's not the hurricane you're writing about, and it's not even really the focus of the story. So explain to us Penumbra.
Okay, so I was doing a lot of last year. I was doing a lot of research about ghost stories. I knew that I wanted to write a Texas ghost story. So there's a lot of material to work with. So I was just going through some books and getting inspired, and I kept coming back, because especially for those of us here on the coast, in Texas, like hurricanes happen, right? They're devastating. So that's something that even living in North Carolina, I experienced hurricanes there, and then here in Texas, hurricanes. So I just kept coming back to a storm, and that's just horrifying, right? Everything that comes with that. So I was reading up about the Great Storm of 1900s, and this story initially, I believe the title for it was The Great Storm, or The Great Flood. But I wrote the story, and I felt that it was tied up too nicely in a little bow. Like there wasn't too much at stake by the end of it. It was originally more of like a middle grade. So without that constraint, I was like, okay, I can make it a little scarier. I can what's the term they say, like kill your darlings kind of thing. And so I went there with that, and I think it was maybe 2 weeks before I sent it to you. I was going through it, and I just did the revisions. Also title change to Penumbra. It's a story. I struggle with trying to talk about it without giving away the ending. It's tricky, but I have a sister. We have a 17-year difference. So she's a teenager right now. So I was thinking of her doing this, and it's a story about two sisters, an older sister, a younger sister, and it goes on, with our social media and everything, especially with the younger generations. They'll do whatever it takes to get that clout, like that perfect shot, even if it means putting themselves or others in danger. So I was playing around with that, and like, what if I get these girls, right before hurricane, but then they get stuck in that hurricane, and one of the older sister is Alex, the main character of the story, and she ends up trying to get her sister, like, let's go, and her sister's the photographer. She's like, just one more shot for my page, just one more shot. And it takes place, I was envisioning like a futuristic Galveston where Pleasure Pier is no more. Like Pleasure Pier has been since devastated. And so she's like, oh, I'm going to go to Pleasure Pier. I'm going to get some great shots from there. And so that's where Ruby is her name. Ruby goes, and Alex is just like, oh my gosh, typical. I have to go after you. Come on. And as she goes after her sister, the hurricane arrives. The flood comes into Galveston, and instead of Ruby getting swept away into the sea, it's Alex, the one who is trying to protect her. And so the story is just about Alex trying to survive the hurricane to get back to her sister. And I have some supernatural elements in there. The great storm of 1900, like I think it was at least 6,000 people died, at least. So it was super devastating. And I just imagined, all the lost souls at sea. I believe in my research too, there was imagery of people just taking the bodies, taking the corpses. There was just so many that they would just take them out to sea and dump them. So there's imagery there. Yes, I have imagery there. And while I was writing as well, Dia de los Muertos was going on. So we had gone to that festival. So that later plays into the story, again, without giving too much away. But I wanted to have a Texas story. I wanted to have a hurricane story. I wanted to add some cultural elements for my family. And I cried, and I felt like if I'm crying, it's genuine, and I hope it comes across that way. And yeah, so that's my story. I feel like it's a lot stronger with the edits that I made, and the title change to Penumbra, kind of that state of like partial shadow, kind of the in between.
It's a lovely story, both for the supernatural element, but also just for the actual physicality of Galveston. So you can really picture, if you've been on that seawall, you can picture all the buildings there being inundated, and It's really cool. I think it's very effective. Leanna, you were just here. Again, we said 2 months ago, you were here for an event at your sister's fantastic bar, and with the book that you've got in your hands, Ghosts of the Forbidden, which is the first story in the Glazier's Gap haunted romance series, and which you just did a wonderful job with. And you returned to the weird, spooky town of Glazier's Gap in your story. Which is I've lost the title of the story. It's actually not in the
Silhouette again is what it is
Silhouette
called.
again. How
The
strange!
Silhouette again.
It's not written right here. I'm so sorry.
Because it's ghostly, you know.
Yes, it actually disappeared right before my
does.
eyes.
It does.
And when you're talking live is actually when things disappear from your teleprompter. So yes, okay. So Ghost of the Forbidden takes place now. Silhouette again takes us back to the teenage years of the 1990s.
1990s. Yes, my
Yeah.
teenage years. Yes, exactly. So I have this whole backstory, as we know. So Glazier's Gap is a Castlebridge Media creation that we all work together to create this spooky town in this small town, Colorado, Twilight Zone sort of town. And this has a lot of, Dark Shadows vibes and lots of, it's a gothic romance, and lots of characters are grappling with past lives that they don't know that they have. And in Ghost of the Forbidden, I'm dealing with Lillian, a main character who's coming into Glazier's Gap, Colorado as an outsider. When I wanted to continue diving into what is this town about and who are the main characters that the series would follow as we would go forward with other books in this series, the next book I would want to write would be focusing on this woman, Rosalind, who, as you know, a woman in her mid-30s is coming back to Glazier's Gap after living a life away in a big city, and she's coming back into town. So what was it like for her as a child in this town? So it's really sort of Roz's backstory. So I have all this in my head anyway, and I didn't know how much was going to make it onto the page whenever we get a chance to do book 2 of this. So I thought, well, here's a lot of Roz's backstory, because I already know this, that she is uneasy coming back to a small town that she had a lot of complicated feelings about. Now, I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And so I understand what it is like to live in a small town, knowing that you are probably going to leave at some point, but you just don't know how you feel. You don't know how to get out. You don't know how you feel about your place in the world there. And you're also dealing with depression, which is something that's very real and something I've dealt with and something I make very real on the page for Roz. And she channels a lot of that depression into her music. She's a rocker. She's got a band called Silver Death, because it's an old silver mining town, right? So come on, it's basically like if Tori Amos was like met Nirvana is kind of my vibe for Silver Death. I really kind of want to make this band now. I really kind of love this concept. But so she's on rock piano. She's this punk rocker who is in love with both of her bandmates. One of who is like super goth, and the other who's just like, like a hot ginger who becomes the town bartender who you meet in Ghost of the Forbidden. So it's all this like interweaving of these characters that I feel like I know really, really well. And so I have this sort of moment of, okay, I want this sort of slice of life moment for you to meet Roz as a teen, and full of teen angst and full of a kid not exactly knowing what life has in store for her, which was very me. So I was like, I'm going to pull from some of my own experiences here and my own difficulty with, a negative, if not suicidal ideation, stuff like that, which is very real and it's something that I want to be accessible for anybody to look at this, because I know it's something a lot of teens deal with, and it's definitely something I've dealt with. And so it's like, I just wanted to be real about that, and then have this other creepy thing that happens, because the thing about Glazier's Gap is it's full of creepy things. So what's creepier than literally a silhouette outside of your bedroom periodically, and you don't know what to think of it, you don't know what to make of it, and there's this sort of family legend about, our family has a guardian angel, and like, well, that doesn't look like a guardian angel to me. That looks like
It
someone
might be
else.
demonic. Yeah.
So I don't know about that. And then, so it's the concept of like also family myth making too. And so what is that thing and why is it there? And its presence is just this sort of dread that goes through this very atmospheric little story that I also was writing in a fever dream of like being on the road for my nonfiction about ghosts while I'm on the road for this book and trying to get this into you by your deadline. And so there's some fever dream in there that just got right into that page because I was cranking out this deadline because I wanted to go back to this town. I love this town. I love what we built with this place. It is this dreamy, spooky place, and I wanted to live in it a little bit more. But it really is, it's powered by the dread of what the hell is that thing outside the door, while Roz is thinking like, what is my place in the world? And I think that's, I hope that is continues to be relatable.
I'm so happy that you came back to that world and that it's like laying in these tiles, right? That begin to and they're all creepy, but it shows more and more of that town. So thank you very, very much. It's funny, actually. Let's talk about that. I would love to hear from you guys. There's all these things that you guys have brought up about process. So Leanna, you mentioned to me this story when you were in town. You said, I'm working on this story. I'm going to try to get it done. I'm working on it at night in my hotel room. When I used to write stories for Polidori, which was a party that we used to have, I'm sure you remember back in the 90s, I would often go to the library and I had like 6 hours to get this story written before the party. Does that pressure help? You know, like, is it helpful for somebody to go, I need this story by Sunday night, or does it cause you to freeze up and not do it?
Deadlines are real. No, deadlines are so key. Deadlines are absolutely necessary, especially for me, which if I don't have that external thing, I can't make my own deadlines. I have to have somebody make them for me because I need that external goal.
That has my full support.
Yeah, I
love the external deadline because I'm horrible at getting stuff done on my own pace.
Because I can live with shame if I disappoint myself, but I can't live with disappointing other people. So and yeah.
There is a lot of truth to what David just said, but counterpoint to Scott and Leanne, that's the whole reason why I don't do NaNoWriMo anymore. You put that deadline on me, and I actually freeze up and stop. And I can write a novel in a month, but not during November when everybody's asking me if I can do it. So
yeah, and that's almost like an amorphous kind of competition, though, right? You're like, I don't know if I want to dive into that. That feels really, I don't want to be competing with other people to see who gets a novel finished.
There's a thin line between accountability and whatever becomes toxic past accountability. I don't know what that is.
I went to Clarion West, and we had to write a short story a week.
Goodness gracious.
For me, that was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And I was able to do this. So having that deadline, now, of course, it was just rough drafts. You know, we got notes and all that kind of stuff, but you couldn't go back and revise it. You had to go on to the next story because you were also, you were also reviewing everybody else's story. So that's 17 other stories every week that you were reading and critiquing. And then you had the lectures from whoever was teaching that week. But it really taught me that I could do it, having that deadline. I don't need a deadline. I mean, I was sick for so long and I just, had to write whenever I could write. And I learned in television that you can't tell them I don't feel inspired right now.
Yeah.
Or to write on demand. But I didn't think I could do a short story a week, and I did.
That's amazing. That sounds like a really cool challenge. I actually like to go on writing retreats. I've never really been on a big organized retreat, but I often will go away for 3 or 4 nights just by myself somewhere and try to break the days up into 3 writing sessions a day to try to get as much done over the course of that 3 or 4 days as I can. And it is it's almost like a cleanse, because I couldn't keep up that kind of work pace indefinitely, but I can do it for 3 or 4 days, and that's God, I love that. I love it more than anything else. It is my favorite writing activity. Okay, so I made notes as I went through, and one of them was on writing for YA versus writing in general. Does that mean anything? I mean, in other words, if somebody says, hey, listen, I need a middle grade James Bond, can you get me a middle grade James Bond? And you go, sure, because that's what we answer when people ask us. We go, absolutely. What's the deadline? But I mean, would you actually write differently than you would write an adult? I mean, does middle grade or YA mean anything, or are they just marketing words?
I mean, I can take that. I write
Please.
a lot of middle grade and YA. My 13th Continuum trilogy is a sci-fi YA series, which is set up at Sony for television right now. And then I also write the popular Disney Chills series for Disney with Disney villains haunting kids. Disney pays me to scare children, which is pretty much the awesomest thing. Every book has a dark and terrible ending. Nothing good happens to any of the kids in the books. My Maleficent book was out this year. She's my favorite villain. I also write some Vader stuff for Star Wars, which is also a middle grade category technically. And I have another thing coming out, and I do some adult content as well. So the way I don't like to write down to kids. I don't write down to them at all. The thing that I try to do is really write about things that are important to them, things that they relate to with that perspective of the age range. So, but at the same time, you can't write down to them or be too on the nose. So I try to meet them where they live. As far as the scares go, Disney lets me go really dark. When I wrote the first book with Ursula, Part of Your Nightmare, I was like, I'm just going to write these scares as if I would for an adult. And again, this is fantasy violence. This isn't, like Friday the 13th or something. It's, it's Ursula. It's, Little Mermaid tonally in some ways, but Ursula is fabulous. But anyway, so I just wrote them pretty dark and creepy, and the endings equally dark and terrible. And they never pulled back any scares, because I was like, it's harder to make something scary that isn't scary. I know this because I worked on like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remakes, Freddy vs. Jason at New Line. If it's not scary in the first place, then to take something that's too intense, which is the case with, for example, the Texas Chainsaw remake, we had to cut that back because it was so intense. I think Michael Bay did the recut of the film. But it holds up because it is really scary. It was all in the can. We didn't have to reshoot for scares. So that was my approach with Disney, and they've never pulled it back. I just get notes from my editors like, oh, this is so creepy. Oh, this is so terrible. Oh, this is awful. This is the worst ending yet. And so that's kind of my approach to it. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Someone else mentioned that. And we had the Disney Channel, and so much that was on there traumatized me as a child. Like Return to Oz. I don't know if there's a you guys,
no.
It's an adult.
Return to Oz.
Return to Oz.
Oh my God, the heads.
The heads, the wheelies.
I'm still not okay about the heads, you guys.
Yeah.
I still
I
think about
blocked
that.
out the talking chicken, and then we watched it as an adult, and I was like, I didn't even remember there was a random talking chicken in this Faruka Balk movie.
And he wrote those in the 1900s.
I know, and they're terrifying. Or even the Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe scared the crap out of me. Like that witch was so scary. Wizard of Oz, the original, I think is scary. Disney's The Black Hole. Does anyone remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, Maximilian.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, it took me a while to remember The Black Hole. Yes.
They thought they were making Star Wars, which I think is the funniest thing. It was the biggest bomb. Disney was like, we're going to make our version of Star Wars. And that was Disney's The Black Hole, which is nothing like Star Wars. It's as if like C-3PO like was murdering people in his spare time on the side. So
Granted, that would have been more fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like, some content nowadays for kids, I think they try to make it a little too safe. And I don't want to say PC is not the right word, but they try to curate. And the best way to experience, anything that makes you anxious or scared is in literature, right? It's in a situation where it is a safe context because, it's on the page, it's not in real life. And it helps kids learn how to deal with things that will come up, because as we know, it's like, Hemingway, the world breaks everyone. Some of us are strong at the broken places. Like we have to learn, that, life is emotionally abusive, like Taylor Swift just said on her new record. And so, sorry, I love Taylor. And yeah, so I think literature is the best way for kids to deal with things, even if it is a creepy sea witch or the mistress of all evil or all the things that we're writing about in these stories. That's the best context for them to learn and grow and see character characters work through problems, and they can see that they can do the same. So I'm very passionate about writing for younger readers, and it's particularly, I think, horror and spooky is fabulous for these age ranges. I mean, you guys remember I was obsessed with Christopher Pike and Goosebumps. I couldn't get enough. As a kid, I love spooky. And I think that's part of also why like the Disney villains, you know, like Serena Valentino's series has a huge following. I love Serena. She's so fabulous. But the villains have such a following, right? Just on their own, standalone from the films. And I know this now because I've been writing them. There's a passionate fan base that doesn't even care princesses. Oh, Flowers in the Attic. Oh, that traumatized me because I also like have brothers and stuff. And I was like, what is going on in this attic? This is very upsetting on 100 different levels. But yeah, was that like for kids or something? Stephen King is the other one, obsessed, and Rice. So anyways, that's my little spiel on it. I don't like to write down, but I do like to make sure that I'm tackling issues from a perspective of something they would care about and through characters that are kind of ciphers for them. So that's my little
There's
spiel.
that concept in TV tropes and otherwise called adult problems, which is in theory the stuff that kids will be bored by. Like, in other words, if I'm writing for y'all, then the whole question of I just got laid off and I don't know if I'll be able to pay the mortgage next month, that is an adult problem, you know, and I might put it into a horror story aimed at adults, but a 12-year-old will be a little bit less moved by that. You know,
Yeah, when you do that, you have to filter it. Like someone put a quote from my second start of the Fright Captain Hook book, which is about a boy who doesn't want to grow up. And it's something about how, you know, his parents are struggling with a lot of this stuff, but, you know, they lie to him and they don't tell him the truth because they don't want him to worry. And his thing is more like parents lie. They lie all the time. I can't trust them. Like they're not honest. They're little lies, white lies, you know.
Yeah.
But there's this filter. And so kids care about it in the way that it affects them. So there's the version, right, of parents often not telling the truth.
Yeah.
Not in a nefarious way, in a protective way, but you know, kids are smart. You guys know they see through this stuff, right? Like they're super aware. And then there's the version like in Part of Your Nightmare where it's the situations the parents have just recently separated. I wanted to write like that situation, which is newly separated, not divorced, but now dad's living in kind of a gross little apartment and finances are very strained now because of the double households. And so I write about it in the way that affects the kids, which is now they're going to dad's on the weekend and the apartment is a little weird and smelly and not what they're used to. And mom is very stressed and always in the office. And so the filter is exactly what you said. If we wrote about it in a way like what you pitched, that would be boring, but in a way that see kids deal with these things right now in real life. Our divorce rate's over 50%, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so then they'll relate to that and understand. So it's like you have to like have that great filter on.
It's funny how as you get older, you know, like I watched Amityville Horror when I was a kid and it was scary, but as an adult, but as an adult, when he can't find the $500 he has to pay the caterer, that's scary. I mean, that and so there are parts of it, you come back to something and you go, this is hitting me in a different way from when
Well, you know, the movie that
I was
hits me the
12.
most that way is E.T. I think E.T. is Spielberg's greatest film, actually, after me. And Spielberg is so famous for the kids' perspective whenever he did something, even just producing like Goonies or anything like that. And so E.T. as a kid, right? It was all about E.T. and the alien and the whole link with the kid freaked me out when they both start to die. Watch it as an adult. You want to know what it's really about? It's about a single mom who dad ran off with a floozy to Mexico. The kids are unsupervised. They're cussing and they're getting into trouble in their own backyard. And she is so stretched then she doesn't even notice an alien living in her house. And it's that scene with Drew Barrymore where she's just trying to tell you, mom, there's an alien. And she's rustling around the kitchen and just trying to put stuff away. You guys know the scene I'm talking about. Is so well choreographed. And as an adult watching it, I'm like, oh, that's what this is really about, right? It's about being a single mom, so stretched then you don't notice the alien in your house.
That is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Peer group is really important too. Like one of the things, you know, I write for adults and I write for teens, and you have to make sure that you don't just have like one token teenager in a group full of adults, even though I was actually that teenager in a group of adults because I really liked hanging out with my teachers. But you need a peer group of other teens so that you are kind of in a teen space when you're writing for YA. You can have adults who factor in, but you really do have like you know, the protagonist has to be in the demographic that you're writing for.
I second that big time.
I would, as a 20-year-old, it does make it a lot like I don't know, it's a very different time to be trying to like write this kind of stuff. You get the like a lot of my stories about like the kid's relationship with his dad, because that's just such a natural thing to grow from when you're like in that age range where you're like finally free on your own, you're able to think about that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Wow, I'm trying to imagine being that close to being a teen and writing about teens, and it's beyond my imagining. That's I got one last question, and then unless, actually, before I ask anything else, are there any questions from the chat that might be worth addressing? There was one that I'll throw to the whole group, which was about pseudonyms. So and that was aimed at Jennifer, who does a pseudonym, but also James, you use a pseudonym.
Yeah.
So I've used them and I've given up on using them. But why use them? Why not use them?
Well, I can talk. My pen name came about. It's Vera Strange, and I love my pen name. I love being Vera Strange. It's fabulous. My original stuff I'll publish under my name, which is Jennifer Brody. And when we were first creating the brand Disney Chills for Disney, we thought, wouldn't it be fun if like the kids were like, who is this creepy person who's writing these really scary books? You know, because it's this age range of 8 to 12, there's still a suspension of disbelief, right? They're still able to believe in certain things. It's like the Lemony Snicket idea, right? Like who wrote Lemony Snicket? So it would be nice to have a filter and kind of play into the persona of like, I just enjoy giving you nightmares, you know, like, so that was the whole idea behind Vera Strange originally. And it's a name I've now used. I used it on my Darth Vader story, Blood Moon Uprising. I'm using it on another Secret Disney project that comes out next year, which is another big film universe of theirs. And I think I'm going to continue to use it in other work. But one of the things I think about it as is it distinguishes a lot of my more adult work from my middle grade series, and particularly my spooky villains work, because I'm now known as the queen of villains, apparently. So that was sort of the idea, but it's kind of nice, you know, because Stephen King does this, right? To have two different options for how to position something. And also, if you do have a lot of work and are kind of prolific, which was Stephen King's issue, it gives you another option to put some more like things out and play around. But that's sort of how it evolved. And I kind of like having the distance a little bit, especially because the Disney stuff has a really big fandom tagged onto it. Gives me a little bit of personal distance from the work. And, you know, Star Wars has a pretty dedicated fan base as well. But that was mine. I'm curious to know why other people use them or what they chose. Some authors I know do it because they're like, I write YA, just normal publishing, and then I self-publish romance, and I want to distinguish the two. But I'm curious for other people.
I'm kind of the opinion that using a pen name sucks. There's some serious problems with it, especially when you go to cash a check that was written in the pen name before you set up a business account that can take it. But even harder is to check into the hotel room under a pen name when you don't have an ID with that pen name, right? But there comes a point in your career when you've hit enough milestones that maybe you can't dump the pen name anymore, which is why I've still got the pen name and still use it. But the reason why I took it had to do with the reason why so many other people do it. It would have interfered with the career. There were career issues that I had to take into account, and it's like, well, I can't do that. I can't do this stuff under my real name. I can't have this come back to me like that.
When I lived in DC, I was part of many writers groups where most people used a pen name because they all worked for 3-letter agencies and couldn't use their real name. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, my best friend from high school, I won't say her real name, but she writes under Robin Talley, and she writes queer YA, and she's published probably upwards of 10 books and just announced a new one, Carnegie Medal nominated, really cool stuff. But she started out with a pen name. I think it had to do with her normal day job and just keeping the queer YA that she writes separate. And remember, this was a time, you know, things have changed very quickly, but when she started doing this, it was a little more, and we're from the South, we're from like Virginia. It was a little more controversial.
They've changed, but not that much. If you were in Tallahassee today and you were an 8th grade teacher and you were also publishing queer fiction, I would recommend a pen name.
Yeah, they're banning books as well. Yeah, we grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. So yeah.
I'll say it's also like in politics, which is something that I've worked in since I was in high school. It's very much like a consideration of you know, if you write something and you're working on a campaign and the campaign doesn't like what you write, you could get the campaign in trouble, you could get the people in trouble. So I am still early enough that I've not really thought about a pen name. Maybe for like my Walmart Western romances, when I start writing those. But
I really wanted to read a Walmart Western romance.
I wrote television under Debbie Smith, so I wanted to differentiate in my because Debbie Smith, that was my name. I mean, if you try to look me up on IMDb under Debbie Smith, you have to go through a whole list of Debbie Smith.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I decided to do D. Len Smith, and I've done most of my publishing under D. Len Smith. Also wrote audio dramas under D. Len Smith. But when you go to conventions, people call you Lynn. And I don't want to be called Lynn. And I thought about this just recently, long and hard, and this is the first story, The Black Door. I'm using my married name, Deborah Daughetee, because I feel like I'm not D. Len Smith anymore after the lung transplant and the things that I've gone through right now. I feel like I'm a totally different person. And so that's what I decided to do, was change to Deborah Daughetee, even though I have a history in horror writing under D. Len Smith.
But by the way, Leanna, I know that you're a huge Dark Shadows fan, and D. Len Smith is the writer of a number of the Big Finish Dark Shadows audios.
Yeah,
So
I thought so. So I'm very excited.
that is
You did?
I'm very excited. about
Oh,
that.
thank
I'm
you.
a huge
I
Dark Shadows fan. So you're like, I'm fangirling over you right now.
I actually worked for Dan Curtis, who is the creator of Dark Shadows.
Oh yeah,
That's how I got the opportunity to actually write those. So it was very, very exciting.
Well, like I'm just so you know, like a lot of your work is direct inspiration for this book. So just
Which I have to get, because what you just said, it was Dark Shadows X. It's like, okay,
very
I gotta
much,
buy the
very
book.
much.
in some ways, it's Dark Shadows with the serial numbers piled off and then stuck.
Yeah, basically,
in-
yeah. No, I asked
in
Jason. I said,
Colorado.
"How Dark Shadows can I make this?" And he was like, "As much as you want legally. That's not Dark Shadows." So yeah.
I've actually been considering the same thing, because I have worked with Laura Parker on her books.
Yeah.
You know, and so yeah, I've been actually thinking of doing my own version of non-Dark Shadows.
Laura's written for us, by the way. We did a story with her. She is so neat.
She's the one who kept pushing me to you guys.
Oh,
I love this so much.
wonderful.
So please write it so I can read it, Deborah. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's see. Go ahead, please.
I have a funny name story about my name, because I write under all three names, because I was debating about what to do when I first got my first publication contract. And I went to see this particularly powerful psychic who, like, I literally walked in, I sat down, and she knew nothing about me. I actually didn't even give my name. And the question on my heart that I wanted to ask her was like, what do I sign my contract as? Like, how am I going to go out into publishing? What am I going to do? And I sit down, and this lady looks at me and she goes, use all three names, use all three of your names. And I was like, okay, the spirits have spoken. So that's why I still write under all three names.
That's really great. It would have been better if she were
world.
chomping a cigar. Use all three names. And I love that.
It was
really
amazing.
great.
It was unmistakable. And so because I write with the spirit world, like all of my books have ghosts in them, like I'm not going to make my audience mad.
Right. That's really cool. Is there anything that we would like to touch on? Because I know I've kept you guys over time. I've kept you guys over time by, depending on who's talking, either a half an hour or even more, because I think I put 45 minutes on the so I apologize, but I'm so thankful that you've been here to talk about all of this. But I hope I get a chance to talk to you guys again. Castlebridge Media is our website. I will send all of you links to this talk, but I will make sure it goes up on our YouTube page and our Facebook pages and everything. The new The new book is called Castle of Horror Anthology, Young Adult, Volume 9. It's been wonderful listening to all of you share, and I wish I had more time to share with each of you. So hopefully we'll get a chance to do that soon. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful evening. It's going to get busy, so if I don't talk to you before the new year, happy holidays and happy new year. I'll talk
Thanks,
to you soon.
everyone. You guys are all amazing. I
Thanks.
loved hearing
Yeah.
all your stories and sharing space with you in the book.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Guys.
So excited to read your work.